Before I start, I want to be clear about something. This isn't a feel-good story. There's no clear hero here, no clean victory. It's one of those stories that sits in a gray area, where rules, morality, and consequences collide. Some people will say what I did was justified. Others will say it went too far. All I can do is tell you exactly what happened and let you decide how you feel about it. I'm going to start by saying this up front. This isn't a satisfying revenge story. It's not heroic. It's not clever. It's just ugly, tragic, and real. Story 1. My grandfather killed his own father, and no one ever asked why. This is my grandfather's story, and it happened sometime in the early 1960s. He grew up in an extremely remote part of my country, and when I say remote, I mean no electricity, no phone, no neighbors for miles. They lived in a log cabin in the middle of nowhere. Civilization might as well have been another planet. My grandpa lived there with his 3 brothers, his sister, and his parents. It was a violent household. My great-grandfather was an alcoholic, a mean one, the kind where you never knew what mood he'd be in when he walked through the door. My grandpa, his brothers, his sister, and their mother were all used to being beaten. It wasn't talked about. It wasn't questioned. Back then, and in a place like that, people just accepted it as part of life. This is just how things are out here. My great-aunt was the youngest. As my grandpa and his brothers got older, they started working and spending less time at home. Eventually, they moved out one by one. That left my great-aunt alone in the cabin with my great-grandfather. My great-grandmother was often sick, or at least she claimed to be. She spent long stretches bedridden, leaving my great-aunt to take over the household chores. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of things no child should be responsible for. And that's when it started. My great-grandfather began forcing himself on her. She was barely a child. From what my grandpa believes, it likely started before she even hit puberty. It went on for years, and because of how isolated they were, because of the fear, because of the shame, no one intervened. My grandpa has always insisted that he didn't know. He knew his sister was getting beaten more often, he worried about that, but he says he didn't know about this part. I want to believe him. When my great-aunt was 13, she became pregnant. That was the moment everything collapsed. At first, the family assumed the worst in a different way. They thought maybe someone from town had hurt her. No one wanted to say the other possibility out loud. But the truth didn't stay buried for long. The child was his, her father's. The night my grandpa found out, he didn't hesitate. He contacted his brothers, and they all traveled back to the cabin together. They didn't own guns. They didn't need a plan. They used shovels. They beat their father to death. The ground was frozen solid, so burying him wasn't an option. Instead, they burned the body, partly because they had no choice, and partly, I think, because they wanted to erase him, destroy the evidence, destroy the man. No one ever questioned how he died. Different time, different place. My great-aunt gave birth to a son, a child born of incest. He grew up with severe genetic issues. He can barely see, and he only has one functioning kidney. But despite everything, he's alive. He's happy. He has children of his own now, grown adults in their 20s, and they're healthy. My great-aunt never recovered. She drank herself to death in the 1980s. So did my great-grandfather's legacy in a way. Alcoholism didn't die with him. My grandpa became an alcoholic. So did my dad. Trauma has a way of echoing forward, even when the original monster is long gone. My grandpa told me all of this one night when he was drunk. He cried while he told it. I don't think he was crying for his father. I think he was crying for his sister, and maybe for himself too. The cycle finally stopped with my generation. Me and my siblings don't drink, we don't hit, we don't pretend abuse is normal. But that murder, that revenge, it wasn't justice, it wasn't closure, it was just another piece of a much larger puzzle of abuse that started long before that night. Sometimes I think about what my great-grandfather must have believed, that living so far from civilization meant there were no rules, that he could do whatever he wanted and no one would ever stop him. And in a twisted way, he was right, because in the end, his sons learned the same lesson. Out here, you can get away with anything.
Story 2. I outsold everyone, so my company decided not to pay me. I took the job knowing it was going to be ridiculous. This was during the early days of phone deregulation when it felt like the Wild West. Small, long-distance companies were popping up everywhere, all fighting to lock customers into contracts before the next bigger fish swallowed them up. I got hired by one of those new age capitalism marketing firms. You know the type. They insisted we were a family. Every morning started with mandatory yoga, breathing exercises, and some manager ringing a little bell while telling us to visualize wealth. Then they'd hand out tasteless vegan snacks and remind us how lucky we were to be there. The job itself was 100% commission. Normally, that's a red flag, but I'd always been good at sales. And when I looked at their pay scale, I noticed something interesting. The payouts weren't linear. They were exponential. The more contracts you closed, the more absurd the money became. It was clearly designed to motivate people with impossible numbers. We were allowed to work as many or as few hours as we wanted, and our weekly pay was based entirely on that week's sales. So I decided to treat it like an experiment. I told myself I'd give it 1 week, just one. I'd push myself as hard as I possibly could, see what the maximum income really looked like, and then decide if I was willing to keep doing yoga with strangers who clapped after affirmations. For 7 straight days, I worked 14-hour shifts, no breaks, no shortcuts. I used every sales trick I'd learned over the years. By the end of the week, I was exhausted, but curious. When the numbers came in, it wasn't even close. I didn't just outsell everyone that week, I outsold numbers they hadn't seen in an entire month. According to their own pay scale, I had just earned something like $10,000. I remember thinking, okay, so this is real. They actually pay this. The following week, I walked in expecting a massive paycheck. What I got instead was about 5% of what I was owed. They told me there were issues with my contracts, minor problems, things like an apostrophe not being clear enough, a dash in a phone number being slightly crooked. They said I could fix the contracts and resubmit them slowly over the next few weeks. That's when I realized they were trying to screw me. That night, I got a call from the office manager. His name was Frank. He asked if I wanted to grab a drink. I said yes. Over a couple of beers, Frank told me the truth. The owners were in full panic mode. They spread my contracts all over the office floor and crawled around inspecting them, convinced I had to be committing fraud. When they finally accepted that everything was legitimate, they realized something worse. If they paid me what they owed, I would bankrupt them. So they made a decision. They decided to steal from me. Frank told me that's when it clicked for him too. If they were willing to do this to me, they'd do it to him eventually. And honestly, he was sick of pretending yoga made up for being exploited. He asked me if I wanted to go into business with him. I was interested, but I didn't see how we could compete with our own employer. That's when Frank dropped the final bombshell. They didn't even have the contract for our city. They were operating as independent contractors under another company that did have the rights, a guy named Joe, but only in a different city. They were poaching customers where they weren't authorized because Joe wasn't actively using the contract in our area. So Frank and I approached Joe directly. We showed him proof of what was happening and made him a deal. We'd handle the upfront marketing and sales, he'd get the back-end revenue long-term. Everyone wins. Joe contacted the phone company contacted our employer, with lawyers. A week later, Frank and I walked back into the office we used to work in. Most of the furniture was gone. All the yoga mats were missing. The place looked hollowed out. There was a single table, a couple of filing cabinets, and a box with final pay envelopes. I made a point of counting my money right there. The owners, a husband and wife, told us they had to take cash advances on their credit cards just to pay everyone. Then they asked me very seriously if I felt guilty for destroying their lives. I smiled and said, "Nope," and then we left. Our new marketing company made us a lot of money over the years. Eventually, it got bought up by Sprint and the gravy train ended. But that week taught me something I've never forgotten. They weren't mad because I broke the rules. They were mad because I followed them and proved the system was never meant to work if someone actually won.
Story 3. I ruined an online troll's life after he encouraged people to kill themselves. I never went looking for revenge. I didn't even go looking for conflict. Back in 2015, I was just bored and curious. I spent a lot of time Googling pointless philosophical questions, and one day I ended up searching for the meaning of life. That's how I stumbled across nihilism. The idea fascinated me, the belief that life has no inherent meaning, that nothing really matters. I wanted to hear what real people thought about it, not just definitions from websites. So I joined a few Facebook groups centered around nihilism. At first, it seemed harmless. Dark humor, ironic memes, jokes about existence being pointless, a lot of people using humor to cope with sadness. But after a while, something started to bother me. Mixed in with the jokes were people who weren't joking at all, people who were clearly depressed, people who were struggling. And the more time I spent there, the more I noticed how desensitized everyone had become to death. Suicide jokes were everywhere, and because nothing matters, the suffering behind them didn't matter either. I remember one private conversation in particular. Someone told me they didn't want to live anymore. They said the world wasn't real, but their sadness was. That sentence stuck with me. I tried to reassure them. I told them they mattered, that they weren't alone. A few months later, I checked back in. Their account was gone. I don't know what happened to them, and that not knowing still haunts me. Fast forward to 2016, I got a notification from one of the nihilism groups. Someone had posted asking for advice on how to end their life. They said they were scared and wanted it to be peaceful. I started reading the comments. That's when I saw him. One person was giving detailed encouragement, telling them it was the right choice, that death was the solution, that it would all be over quickly. Not joking, not abstract philosophy, direct encouragement. I'll call him Nigel. At first, I thought he was just being edgy, a troll chasing reactions. But when I clicked his profile and started scrolling, my stomach dropped. This wasn't a one-off. Everywhere he went, he did the same thing. He targeted vulnerable people. He reassured them that dying was the answer. He framed it like he was doing them a favor. One post still makes me angry to think about. A man admitted he'd failed multiple attempts and felt ashamed. Nigel replied by telling him not to be hard on himself, that if he kept trying, he'd succeed eventually. That's when I realized Nigel wasn't just a troll, he was dangerous. I created a fake profile and messaged him. I told him I'd seen his comments and that they could seriously harm people. He replied that he didn't care. From what I could tell, he believed that depression was a weakness and that society would be better off without people like that. I warned him that if he didn't stop, there would be consequences. He blocked me. The next day, I checked his profile from my real account. He was right back at it. Same behavior, same cruelty. That's when I noticed something he'd overlooked. His profile wasn't private. I could see everything: his posts, his photos, his friends, his family. Nigel wasn't some isolated internet gremlin. He was married. He constantly posted about how much he loved his wife, how important family was to him. I decided to give him one more warning. This time, I made it personal. Within 10 minutes, I found his home address. I wrote a handwritten letter and addressed it to his wife. I didn't threaten violence. I didn't make demands. I simply told the truth, that her husband was encouraging vulnerable people to end their lives online, that he had to stop, that this was his final warning, and that I was watching. I sent the letter hoping it would scare him enough to stop. Afterward, I felt a flicker of guilt. I hadn't really thought about what it might do to his wife, but by then my focus was locked on one thing: stopping him before someone else disappeared. For about a month, Nigel went quiet. No posts, no comments. I thought maybe it worked. Then he started again. Same pattern, same targets, same cruelty. I was done playing nice. I started digging deeper, and what I found genuinely terrified me. Nigel worked at a care home. He was in a position of trust, responsible for vulnerable people in real life while pushing others toward death online. I knew then that this wasn't just about Facebook anymore. I gathered screenshots, dozens of them, clear evidence of his behavior. Then I looked him up on LinkedIn. He wasn't just an employee, he was in a senior position. I contacted the care home through their official page using a fake profile and a proxy. I sent everything. The screenshots, the dates, the context. They replied that the matter had been escalated to the CEO. A week later, Nigel's name vanished from their website. The care home disappeared from his LinkedIn profile. Shortly after that, his relationship status changed from in a relationship to it's complicated. Then he stopped posting altogether. Eventually, his Facebook account disappeared. He lost his job, he damaged his marriage, his online presence vanished completely. I won't pretend I felt nothing. I felt guilty, of course I did. I destroyed someone's life. But then I remember the people he targeted, the ones who were already barely holding on, the ones who might not be here anymore. Nigel had power over vulnerable people, and he abused it. If my actions stopped even one person from being pushed over the edge, then I can live with the guilt. Everyone has a right to an opinion, but no one has the right to prey on the vulnerable. And sometimes the only way to stop a monster hiding behind a screen is to drag them into the real world and let the consequences catch up.
Story 4. A student tried to ruin my career, so I let the rules destroy her instead. I was an adjunct professor at a college, which already meant my job security was basically non-existent. No tenure, no protection. One accusation, even an unproven one, could have ended my career permanently. That's why I took it seriously when a student decided she didn't like me. From the beginning of the semester, she made it clear. Eye rolls, loud sighs, whispers to her friends whenever I spoke. I ignored it. I'd been teaching long enough to know you can't win everyone over. Then one day, I got called into a meeting. I was told that a student had accused me of touching her inappropriately. Specifically, she claimed I had pinched and caressed her hair during class. I felt my stomach drop. I had never touched this student. I barely interacted with her beyond calling her name for attendance. But suddenly, none of that mattered. The accusation alone was enough to trigger an internal review. HR was involved. The word investigation was used more than once. I remember thinking, this could cost me everything, my reputation, my livelihood, even my freedom, depending on how far it went. The accusation didn't go anywhere in the end. There was no evidence, no witnesses, the story didn't hold up, but the damage was already done. I learned very quickly how fragile my position really was. This student, on the other hand, had a lot riding on her situation too. She was on a scholarship, and not just any scholarship, one that required her to pass all her units by her second attempt. This class was her second attempt. She had already failed or dropped out of another course before. There was one more requirement tied to that scholarship: minimum attendance. Miss too many classes and you automatically failed the unit. I could have reported her for making a false accusation. I could have escalated it. But I also knew how these things usually played out. Even when professors are cleared, the rumor sticks, the suspicion lingers. So I didn't pursue it. Instead, I followed the rules. Attendance was taken manually, names written down one by one, and somewhere along the way I started forgetting to mark her name, even when she was there. A week passed, then another, then another. She never noticed, or maybe she assumed nothing would happen. After all, nothing ever seemed to happen when she made accusations either. A few weeks later, she stopped showing up altogether. Not long after that, I was confronted by one of her friends. They were furious. They told me she had lost her scholarship, that she couldn't afford housing anymore, that she was now living out of her car. They blamed my carelessness in taking attendance. I listened, I nodded, I apologized for the misunderstanding, but inside, I felt something very different, because this wasn't carelessness, this was consequence. She had tried to destroy my career with a lie, and all I had done was let the system she relied on work exactly as it was designed to. I still think about it sometimes, about how easily things could have gone the other way, about how one accusation almost cost me everything, while she assumed there would be no fallout for making it. I don't know if she ever understood what really happened, but I do know this. She learned that actions have consequences, and sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, it's procedural, and it's completely by the book. I've told this story exactly as it happened, without trying to dress it up or soften the edges. I still don't know if what I did was right. I only know that if the roles were reversed, my life could have been over because of a lie. Maybe this was revenge. Maybe it was justice. Maybe it was just the system doing what it was designed to. I'll let you decide. If you were in my position, what would you have done? And more importantly, was I wrong?